Welcome, everyone, to a special book presentation with Darcia Narvaez and Gay Bradshaw, featuring their new book, The Evolved Nest, Nature's Way of Raising Children and Creating Connected Communities, hosted by Genevieve Vaughan and the International Feminists for a Gift Economy. I'm Letitia Layson, your moderator. I'm going to introduce Darcia and Gay. We are really excited and thrilled to have them with us, and their work is so essential. The Evolved Nest, it's actually the maternal gift economy is also part of that nest. So we are just really pleased to see their work out in the world. Darcia Narvaez is a professor emerita of psychology at the University of Notre Dame, Fellow of American Psychological Association and American Educational Research Association. She employs a lifespan interdisciplinary approach to studying evolved morality, child development, and flourishing. She blogs for Psychology Today, Moral Landscapes. Are you still doing that, Darcia? I'm not sure. And hosts the webpage evolvednest.org.
Yeah, I'm not blogging for
You're not blogging.
I have an archive of things there, though. Yeah.
Wonderful. And then not only do you have evolvednest.org, isn't there Kindred?
Yes,
What's the other?
kindredmedia.org. A lot of essays there and videos and podcasts. Yeah.
Wonderful. We'll put both those links in the chat before we close today. Gay Bradshaw is the founder and director of Kurulos Center for Nonviolence. She holds doctoral degrees in ecology and psychology. She was the first scientist to recognize and diagnose PTSD in elephants, chimpanzees, orcas, and other animals. Her books include Pulitzer-nominated Elephants on the Edge, What Animals Teach Us About Humanity, Carnivore Minds, Who These Fearsome Beings Really Are, Talking to Bears, Conversations with Charlie Russell, and Elephant Letters, The Story of Billy and Caney. She is the director and primary carer for rescued domesticated animals and native wildlife at Grace Village, formerly the Tortoise and the Hare Sanctuary in the mountains of southern Oregon. So welcome, both of you. And I'm going to turn the mic over to both Darcia and Gay. They're going to have a conversation with us about their book and their work. And when their presentation is complete, we will open up for questions. So please welcome Darcia and Gay. Thank you so much for coming with us.
Thank you so much, Letitia. I'm going to start giving a little background for how the idea of the Evolved Nest came to be. It's a moral issue for me, and that's been my concern from the beginning of my life. My first memory was sort of like Miss Clavel in the picture book Madeline, where I just woke up and thought something is not right. And my experience was experiencing or watching, observing a child being treated unjustly. And that just seeded my concern. That's been a passion for most of my life, in the last 20 years in particular. I spent half of my childhood outside the United States, mostly in third world places, so-called third world, and could not believe the injustice of the world. Children my age on street corners selling gum and rags, and then coming home and seeing the difference in the ways that children were treated. And so I wondered what was wrong with the world. I started to wonder about my family when I realized not everybody experienced emotional and physical abuse on a regular basis. And I couldn't explain that and couldn't talk about it to anybody, right? And after a bunch of careers, because I have a lot of interests, I discovered research in moral development. It's like, oh my God, that's what I want to know. I want to explore. what it is that is part of that explains this heart-rendering, heart-breaking world that we're in. And at first, moral development is, when I was a grad student, focused on moral reasoning. You know, you think about something, and then you, with your will, you make a good decision, and then with your will, you carry it out. But when I was in school, I went to seminary first before graduate school. And in my first class, the professor called on me because he liked my little paper and said, "Here, talk about your paper." And what happened? My brain froze. I became mute. I couldn't talk. So and I didn't know what was wrong with me, right? So when I learned about morality being, you know, you think and you will and you act, it didn't work when you're frozen. It doesn't work. What's wrong with me? Again, so it took some time, different doors closing, where I started to read widely. I read anthropology, hunter-gatherer childhoods. I read effective neuroscience about animal brain science and development. I read Alan Shore's work on attachment as neurobiology. It's like engraving your brain, how your relationships with your caregivers go in the early years. And James Prescott's work looking at societies around the world, over 400 of them, and what was related to a peaceful society, breastfeeding for at least 2.5 years, and carrying children around, essentially. So it's like, oh my God, I realized that morality is not in your head and your thinking, it's in your body and it bubbles up. So that's where I realized, putting it together, and over time I called it the evolved nest. It's like that explained why I froze, why there's injustice, because people are all dysregulated from the bottom up, and then their thinking gets kind of messed up too. So the evolved nest has been something that I've been working on then for the last 15, 20 years, 20 years really. And I could say a lot more about that, but I was so thrilled to find Gay Bradshaw's work with animals. My growing up wasn't with animals for all sorts of reasons, and I could go into all that too. But she has this big heart and a big welcoming spirit, and a healing orientation to the world that connects us to our animal kin. And so we got our hearts together, our brains together, our fingers together to write this book. So I was so happy that she agreed and that we have made it come about. So welcome, Gay, as well. Maybe you want to say a few words before we get into the book.
Thank you, Darcia. That was lovely to hear again. Wonderful. And it also brings up to me the incredible feeling, although, you know, writing a book or a paper, when it's done and out, it's no longer mine, or, you know, it's out in the world, and it really becomes owned and part of the reader or the listener in that way. But I have to say that I realize now, and Darcia really underscores it for me, it's been such a homecoming. In the process has been such a homecoming, and the creation really kind of unconsciously out of the blue. I mean, we had a point, you know, in terms of collaborating, but really, it really has facilitated my coming home. As Darcia mentioned, I grew up in this, you know, it's hard to describe, just this sort of sense of oneness and acceptance, and a very caregiving kind of family. I grew up with a lot of non-humans, geese and parrots. In fact, my Amazon parrot, Panama, is still here with me, and we're living together, and we've known each other more than 50 years, which is not dog years, it's real years. And so his mind and my mind are just like sort of totally melded in that way. And so, and dogs and cats and tortoises and iguanas, and so that was the world that I grew up in, and where I live now, which is in Southern Oregon, is where I was actually conceived, if not actually born, but actually conceived here. So this is I'm very much part of the earth that I occupy, which is the homeland, it is the homeland, but of the Takelma, the Dakabe tribes, who are no longer here, the gray wolf, the grizzly bear, puma, etc., and the coho salmon. And so then in my life, I sort of went that trajectory, not with any particular direction other than like save the world and, find truth. That was kind of it. And so I went through a number of different kinds of journeys. I went off to college and studied linguistics and Chinese. And I think this is a relevant dimension, which I want to bring up here in terms of Darcia and my collaboration. I wanted to study languages. My mother's family came from Denmark and Sweden. And I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, who spoke 5 different languages with, back and forth and whatever. I first heard the Les Miserables, because she read it to me in French. And as a child, I don't know if this happens to you all, but as a child, you kind of, when you hear these stories and read and hear, they become part of your landscape. So the story and the thread of Les Miserables is in my own narrative. And so I was going to go to the University of Copenhagen, and I spent time there in high school. My mother sent me off when I was 14, much to the outrage of my cohort parents. They thought that was outrageous. But I ended up getting a degree in linguistics in Chinese. And the reason it was Chinese is ostensibly was because I started studying Arabic, but the professor passed, and we were required for a linguistics degree to have a non-Indo-European language. So then I went on and studied Chinese in Taiwan, and later in what was called mainland China and Inner Mongolia, and spent quite a bit of time there. And then wound my way back to this one thing. I went back to Santa Barbara, not really knowing what to do as such. I did a lot of volunteer work, working with ESL, etc. And and then I heard a talk on slime molds from a fellow from Harvard, and it was just galvanizing. And that took me on, like Darcia said, I could go on forever on this, but that was just galvanizing. I was just like, the whole thing about slime molds, I mean, they're incredible. So I ended up starting to take science courses. Again, this was really, I think, resonant at a deep level of finding the truth, whatever that was. I didn't really know. And it eventually led me to going to geophysics and getting a degree in physics. And then that took me into ecology, where I was my background is mathematics and physics, and essentially I be very concerned for the non-human world. And so then I ended up had a 10-year job, and I worked as a government scientist for many years. And just one day, again, I won't tell you the whole story, but one day, then this resonates with what Darcia was talking about, the sense of morality, is I couldn't live with myself working in that work, because it was a betrayal to the land and the animals and nature, who were my family. So I just one day wrote an email and said, I'm resigning. So anyways, once again, I was sort of thrust out in this thing, but in the interim, I had made a contact because I was on a fellowship with the National Science Foundation in Santa Barbara, with a psychological institute, a Jungian institute. And I ended up, not because I wanted another degree, but I ended up getting a second doctorate. It's nothing that I wanted, but it just happened. And in the course of that arc, I had gone to Africa, again with the National Science Foundation, on a study of lions that were suffering from all these maladies in South Africa. And that's when I encountered these elephants, whom were causing great stir among the biologists and the researchers and the public in general, because they were young male elephants who had, it turned out, all these rhinoceroses, endangered black and white rhinoceroses, were found dead. And it finally revealed that they were the teenage male elephants, who were the perpetrators as such. And so I ended up several years later during my dissertation recalling that and looked at them through the lens of neuropsychology, which again is that thread where I came across Alan Shore's work. I'll tell this quick anecdote. I live out in the country here, and I order a book, and there's several days, and then the package arrives. It's always so exciting, and I remember opening up and seeing one of Alan's book, which is like this, and I'm like, oh. But it turned out to be this, and that's when I came across Darcia's work, and the rest is history, as they say. So this intersection of neuropsychology, Alan's work, and Darcia's work really kind of broke through the conceptual barrier for me internally, as well as from an external perspective, in terms of seeing non-humans as behavioral objects. They have psychological terrains, cultural and social terrains, just like Duda, which was my personal experience. So I would have to say that my work, which surprisingly came out with the first diagnosis of PTSD in non-humans, really, when I look back, was a vehicle for me to articulate externally to the outside world what I have experienced in my childhood. So that's how it happened.
That's great. I understand that feeling of your life is going in one direction, then all of a sudden the rug is pulled out and you have to change and you have to move in a different direction. It's happened to me so many times. One thing just to add to what you're saying, Gay, is I think we've come to realize, me later than you maybe, that the indigenous way of being that our ancestors followed for, until recently, until the last few hundred years, most of the world is following these ancestral practices, the evolved nest, and other features like that. That's the wise way to live on the earth and with the rest of our kin, right? And that's what our book is about. It's integrating some of that wisdom. And so you want to go to the book, Gay?
Yes, I will. I would say that, a theme that has come out for me in post the book being published was, wow, this really sense of we belong. There's been this, the dominating culture of the last 10,000-15,000 years has always said we're separate. And there's an incredible drive for reconnection. And I think what the experience of the book really has been for me and shows is we've always been connected and we belong. And I think that notion of we belong with the rest of nature is a very powerful one.
And in this time of great loneliness, across the world in all ages, really, this is the message, right, of reminding everyone what we've forgotten, that we belong here. We are members of the earth community. We're partners with all these other wonderful creatures and ways of being, that we can be partners with them in responsible ways. And that's the kind of thing we're trying to encourage readers to take up.
Yeah, as Thich Nhat Hanh always said in his Gata, I am home, I have arrived. I'm going to begin with just a short epigraph from the first chapter. The first chapter, which Darcia will expand on, is called Nature's Way. Webbed feet planted on the Antarctic ice. A father bends down to tend his son. High in the canopies of the Amazon, nestlings raise their beaks to join the family chorus. Under the heat of the African sun, trunks of mother and aunts reach out to help the newborn stand. Below the sparkle of Atlantic waters, a baby whale glides alongside his mother. Large or small, landborn or waterborne, they are immersed in love. Their hearts beat with the same song that has been passed down generation after generation, lessons from the mother of them all, nature. These melodies are faint in our human lives today. Heavy from forgetfulness, hearts and minds have grown weary and brittle. How do we recover this reverential song of wellness? When we return, rejoice, and rejoin nature's way.
And this is the heart of the book, and it's the heart of the maternal gift economy. This is the gift economy we're talking about. That is a full community of gifters, not just moms, right? It's all the nurturers that we are nurtured by the natural world, by the trees, the insects, all the animals and plants that give us life and accompany us throughout our lives. So we are, throughout the book, calling forth our deep understanding and feeling of being part of that community of belonging. In the first chapter, we spend quite a bit of time discussing Jean Liedloff's experience. She was a socialite from New York City who, in an accidental way, became an anthropologist or an ethnographer of sorts, going along with some Italian diamond hunters to the Amazon and falling in love with the Yaquana there and spending several visits, spending time living with them and just being astounded by how happy they were with so little in life. But actually, so little material wealth doesn't mean you have so little social or ecological wealth, right? So they were wealthy in so many other ways in that gifting economy way. And so the evolved nest, then we introduce it, and then in the last chapter we go through more specific characteristics. But what we've found in my lab to identify 9 components, I'll just mention them here, and then we'll pick up a few of them and talk about a particular animal's nest and how they provide the particular component. My lab has identified 9 based on the ethnographies of the nomadic foragers around the world, and they represent how our ancestors lived, how pretty much 99% of us lived across space and time. It's a human way of living. It's an animal way of living. It's our kinship way of living. And each animal has slightly variations on the evolved nest. But these components that we have examined in my lab are focused on humans, and they include soothing, perinatal, and prenatal experiences. So the mothers feel supported so that the biochemistry and the way the mom's body is growing the baby is a positive growth state. And so she is conveying to the baby that the baby's wanted. The community is conveying to the mother that she's supported and the baby is wanted. Birth is soothing and not painful. No painful procedures, no circumcision, for example, no separation of the baby from the mother, and then a lot of close attention initially between mother and child in those first days and weeks, and then extending to a broader set of attachments beyond mom. So I see mom as the bridge to a full attachment set of community attachments, really. Then there's breastfeeding. Our species, probably like other apes, needs around 4 years of breastfeeding, which blows the mind now of modern people because how you do that? You can hardly do it for a month. So anyway, part of the Evolved Nest book and the work we do is to show how it matters, because all this is linked to optimal human functioning. And that means being cooperative and intelligent, ecologically, intelligent socially, intelligent interpersonally and intrapersonally. All the intelligence are grown through the evolved nest. So breastfeeding is linked to all sorts of things. The longer you do it, the better it is for the mother, less cancer and so on, and for the baby. And our anyway, I'll keep going. So then there's affectionate touch, pretty constant in the baby years, because the baby resembles a fetus of other animals until about 18 months of age. And so babies need to have an external womb experience. That means their needs are met immediately to keep the growth state going in the proper healthy direction. And caring and touch and breastfeeding grows the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, linked to all the major systems of the body that affects your health for life and your ability to get along and have intimacy. So affectionate touch, really important, but it's not just mom, right? It's a set of caregivers. So the mom has a break. The mom has got other things to do, right? But there's someone there, grandma, auntie, father, grandpa, neighbor, who's there to meet the needs of the very needy, vulnerable baby. And there's responsive relationships, and this would be with the community of allo, we call them allo other mothers, allo parents, who are there to make sure the child feels wanted, secure, like they belong all the time, right? You don't leave a baby alone because you're breaking that sense of security. And you keep that child out of a feeling of distress. You don't impose distress on the child. Again, that breaks that feeling of security, which gets, it's like a bad seed in the heart. It's hard to, once the child has had repeated experiences of being distressed and left alone and not comforted, etc., they will take forward that sense of low confidence, fearfulness, and easy manipulation of them by authoritarian authorities. So it's convenient for a system that wants that. So another one is play, self-directed play. That means the child gets to decide to run around, full whole body, rough and tumble play, wrestling and chasing and climbing trees, and all that helps the brain grow in so many ways. We have so much literature on that now. It's also a healing experience for adults who haven't had the good nested experience. Go play with a 0 to 6-year-old child. You have to play and be in the moment, and that's going to grow the parts of your brain, the right hemisphere in particular, that is going to increase your empathy, increase your self-confidence, increase your sense of belonging to the cosmos, to the world, and feeling at home with others. Then there is, let's see, nature, immersion, and connection. So this is our heritage too. So that's part of our discussion in this book is nature nurtures us. So it's not being alone just with humans is not growing your full humanity. And nature immersion then is part of that context for growing the receptive intelligence to be able to actually pick up on signals from the other non-humans and to be able to know how to get along with them and so on. And then finally, I think I might be missing one. Oh yes, the welcoming climate would have been earlier from the beginning, with the mother feeling welcome with a pregnancy, welcome child, always kept in the positive emotional set, sense of belonging, always part of who you are. And then finally, routine healing practices, which are, so these are based on the nomadic foraging communities. The San Bushmen, for example, have been around for 150,000 years at least, and they carry the genes of all our ancestry. And they will have healing practices of singing, dancing, always together in circles and around fires at night, maybe all night, for healing, for grieving. And healing would be of individuals or relationships or community and nature relationships as well. And that's full of what they call nam, this life force energy that's shared then by the healers with everyone. And so that gets us back into feeling in our bodies, centered as good people, as part of the earth again, part of the community. It's very easy for humans to get off balance because we can go into our ego consciousness, and that then can start to get out of hand, thinking you're better than someone else, and course, they don't allow that. They tease that away. So those are the things that are part of the evolved nest: the soothing perinatal experiences, the affectionate touch, breastfeeding for several years, welcoming climate, social play, free play, responsive care, allo parents. And we need most of this we need throughout life. So it's not just for babies, just the birth and breastfeeding, but the rest of it, we all need play. We all need mentors. We all need to feel welcome. We all need nature immersion, and we all need routine healing practices. So I'll stop talking and let Gay jump in with what she'd like.
That was wonderful, Darcia. One thing that popped out while you were talking about Jean Liedloff, as if you're not familiar with her, as she said, she was a Manhattan socialite. Her mind was all elsewhere. And I think what her story and her revelation really underscores is that this awakening to our belonging to nature, non-human nature, can happen right away. I mean, it doesn't have to, not everyone, we all have our journeys, but I think the notion is we can make a change within a moment in that way. And I think that's important, because everything feels so monumental, and obviously there is the momentum of the culture and the systems and everything. But I think it's a very important sense of empowerment to know that an individual can make a change immediately in that way.
Yeah, that reminds me of David Bohm, the physicist's notion of insight intelligence. He says that our creativity and our insights come from what he calls the implicate order, the kind of vast realms of reality. And explicate order is what we see and can touch. But the implicate order is all this other stuff, dark matter and who knows what. And our insights and our wisdom is coming from there, out there. It's not in our heads. Our heads have getting looped in cultural thought, which he said was very dangerous and unhelpful. And that's sort of what we train in schooling, right? Is this ego consciousness of thinking, logical, mathematical thinking, which can be very detrimental, as we can see, as the Western world has been taken over by it. This is Ian McGilchrist's argument in his just monumental tome, The Master and His Emissary. And that refers to the master sends his emissary out to pay attention and take care of all the different aspects of the realm. And the emissary starts to think he's in charge. And that's the left brain. So the left brain, which is this little part of us, the ego consciousness, starts to think it's in charge, and it's not connected to the rest of the brain. It's not connected to outside forces. It's the right hemisphere that's connected to everything outside, inside. And it knows, reality. It's able to deal with dynamism. And the left brain isn't, but it gets these ideas, these ideals, and wants to impose them. Now, it's very useful to have this problem-solving left brain, but to be used cautiously, carefully, once in a while, not to just reside there. What we've done in the Western world is we've pushed people into that realm as the way to be human, because we undercare for children when the right hemisphere is growing so quickly in early life. That's why you want the baby with you all the time. You're interacting all the time, because that's growing the right hemisphere and all the know-how for getting along with others, and how to stop and start conversations, how to, signal, how to understand emotions, and so on. Our social emotional intelligence, that's all the right hemisphere. But we kind of shut that down in the industrialized capitalist world, and we push young children into reading, into sitting with worksheets, and then we take them to school and we say, just think, don't feel, and don't look out the window and watch the animals. Just focus here on this stuff. And so they begin to forget that bigger sense of being part of the Earth community. And so I was bringing all that up for some reason, but sorry, I go on tangents. When you're old, that's what you do. And I think we have to remember that who we are is not that little left brain ego consciousness. And in the United States, we're having a problem with that, because all these people to pick one identity, and then if someone threatens it, it's like, oh, I have to get you out of here. You're poison. You're dangerous, right? And that's this left brain thing that we've pushed everyone into from all the stress, from all the undercare, lack of the evolved nest.
I'm thrilled that you brought up David Bohm. Of course, that resonates with me. I worked for 10 years with a man named Charlie Russell. There's a documentary on the internet. It's a BBC, and it's called Edge of Eden. His name is Charlie Russell. And Charlie lived with brown bear. Well, he was raised in Canada, and he lived with grizzly bears all his life through his 70s. And then he spent 10 years in Kamchatka, Russia, with brown bears, who are the cousins of grizzly bears. And it was not his purpose, but he ended up becoming the nanny, or really being the mother of 10 orphan brown bears whose mothers had been shot. And so his responsibility was to care for them and teach them the principles of the evolved nest, essentially. And Charlie and I worked together for 10 years. He also was, as he called it, press ganged by a mother brown bear, whom he called Brandy, into being a nanny for 3 sets of her babies. So he met her one day, and she just basically left her cubs with him, and he was like astounded. And but that became a routine for 7 years, 3 sets of her. So essentially, she was also a mentor to him, and teaching him, and sometimes a little bit more gruff ways, to really understand nature's way and the ethics and principles of not only brown bear society, but nature as a whole, which really works as this interleaving, all these different animal and plant communities and societies really work in an incredible gift economy. And so when you look at non-humans through the lens of the neurosciences and through the lens of the gift economy, what you see is, oh my gosh, they're embodying these things. And that's why everything works. That's why nature is so enduring. That's why nature is so peaceful and so beautiful. Yes, there's things that happen. Oh, a wolf will eat a moose and all of those kinds of things, but they happen, they're by necessity, and they're over, and things settle down into harmony and peace, and things work. There's incredible resilience. And it's also a very strong, there's a strong indicator is that most of us, I think, and even those who have suffered, maybe in particular, those who have suffered dreadfully from trauma, from the violence of our conspecifics of other humans. For example, like I've worked with Vietnam veterans, and to the one whom I met, they go to quote unquote nature because nature's predictable, nature is loving, nature has unconditional consistency in that way. But in that, I write about Charlie, unfortunately passed. We worked together for 10 years. And that was the book I wrote called Talking with Bears, Conversations with Charlie Russell. And it's really the episteme I try to describe after our 10 years together, the episteme and ontology of Charlie and those of the bears with whom he lived. And the final chapter, which gives me the segue to what Darcia brought up about David Bohm, really looks at through the lens of quantum physics from David Bohm's work, and it shows how Charlie and David Bohm have very similar experiences, particularly in childhood and throughout life, of living this embodied implicate order and what David Bohm called hollow movement. So we do in the book, our book together, Darcia and I, the first chapter is about brown bears and does touch on that. But perhaps, Darcia, is there another chapter you'd like to focus on, the elephant?
Yeah, I think the elephant. You brought up elephants earlier, and I think that's. Should I read the epigraph, and then you want to talk about your experience more, or?
Yeah, either one. Yeah.
Okay, let me find it here. This is chapter 3 on mutual accompaniment. The cloudless, airless sky almost swallows the land. As she raises her trunk to taste the weather, the mother's face suddenly stills. A rolling lurch pulls her attention inward, The moment has come. Huge, wrinkled, gray shoulders lean in. Red dust billows and pillows as other mothers trace a circle around the laboring mother. Blood stains her legs. She sways, and the miracle begins. The slippery sliding of an infant pushing his way out from her womb into the space below, a patch of earth amid churning feet. Like so many tentacles, trunks wind their way, touching and caressing the newborn as his trunk wriggles free from the amniotic sac and he takes his first breath of Africa. One mind, one body is pulled into the constellation of many. A baby elephant is born.
Thank you, Darcia. Yeah. It brings up a lot of things. I'll tie it in. The first thing as Darcia was reading about the churning of the feet, a lot of elephants are kept in captivity or brought in captivity for the purpose of breeding them for exploitation. And there's a great myth that the mother will step on the baby and kill the baby, so they chain the mother up so that the baby, while she's giving birth, and they continue. They take the baby away, weigh the baby, and whatever. The baby is a commodity, and it is true that sometimes mother elephants will have killed their babies, infants. Elephants in zoos and other captive situations have killed each other. And that all derives, but that never happened in the wild. They are herbivores. They're Pacific. They form deep relationships, not only within themselves, which is the natal family, which Darcia just described in that epigraph, is the natal family made up of a mother and aunties, ala mothers, other children. And that natal family then is nested within a larger nest of another association. So it's this whole tree, kind of an anastomosing culture that once stretched across all of Africa, and then of course in Asia, but different species. And the elephants that I spoke about in South Africa with the PTSD, this relates to that, is that when I looked at them, again through that lens of neuropsychology, and I would say just intuition, it turns out that the young males, they were 13, 14, 15 years old, had suffered the series of severe traumas, so complex PTSD as such. So when they were babies with their families, helicopters, gun-bearing helicopters, fired down on them and slaughtered, and then took the babies, grabbed the babies, they tethered them to their family, their mothers, while they were getting them ready to transport them in trucks. And these were just 1 to 2 years old. And the purpose of this at that time was that South Africa was recovering from apartheid. Well, they were just about ready to move into a post-apartheid government. And so there was a huge push to bring elephants and what they call the big five, lions, leopards, back into the private reserves for ecotourism, as well as national and provincial parks, because they'd all been killed off. So this was, again, an economic reason to bring these animals back. And they took baby elephants because at the time, there wasn't really the sort of ability to transport adult elephants. So they brought these babies, took them to places they'd never been. They were left without any kind of care. There might have been maybe an elephant around or two, but they were not related. They were traumatized themselves. And so these young males in particular, I'll just go back for a little bit, the general kind of care arc of a baby elephant's life is, as Darcia described, being born into this welcoming network of constellation of loving community, cared for by the mother, but really spending time, I think, like more than 50, 60% of the time, with other elephants, even suckling from other elephants and playing with other babies and older siblings and also the aunties, etc. And then the males, young boys, when they reach about 10, 12 years old, they're either kind of pushed out, some of them really don't want to leave, or they leave voluntarily and join an all bull, that's the male adult elephants, group or area. And for the next 15 or so years, or more, until like they're in their early 30s, okay, that's like 17 years, they are mentored by these older males. So these young males who were so traumatized, they had none of those experiences. So it's not just what they didn't have, it's what also happened to them. And so they went into premature mush. In other words, that's the hormonal secretion at an early age, 15, 17 years early. And I've written about, the various kinds of hypotheses in terms of, neurobiologically, neuropsychologically, what was going on. But they sexually assaulted, many occasions, the rhinos and killed them. So that is such a startling example. And Darcia and Alan, of course, has written a seminal paper on that, have spoken extensively about these parallels in our human societies.
It's such a horrible experience, and we do, not extremely, but we do kind of, I see it as torture. We do this to babies too, right? We separate them and do all sorts of things to make their, I don't know, to make it convenient for doctors. A lot of practices in birthing hospitals were set up when they thought that babies didn't feel any pain. There's still people that think that. All right, so how about if we go to you want to pick one? Okay.
I'll let you pick one.
Okay.
It's a tyranny of choice.
No, there's too many. How about touch? So that's the Amazon parrots, since you brought up parrots earlier. Yeah.
That's Panama. Let me find that chapter.
Okay.
Yeah, often people ask us, how did you choose these, animals? Because there are obviously so many. And we did some, like, Darcia loves wolves and bears, and I do too. And then it was just organic. And in some ways, like, we have one chapter on the octopus. And believe it or not, those are invertebrates, and they have the same, they function in the same principles and ethics and of the gift economy and also of the evolved nest. And so the parrot one, though, is a little bit pointed in the sense of it celebrates Panama. So, touch, Amazon parrots. They knew it was happening even before the shell was breached. They heard and felt a gentle but urgent rocking. Something grayish black began to push through. A chick. A second and third followed, and before long, there are 3 young, gaping, crying mouths reaching up to their parents' beaks. Mother and father, crossing beaks briefly, bend down to greet their children's eager faces. Father flies off, returning within moments to offer regurgitated fruit to the newborns. Beaks almost larger than the heads that support them are open wide. Beseeching voices, mixed with joy and anxious need, pull the parents closer as they feed and touch the nestful of new chicks.
Now, I usually think of touch and cuddling as a mammal thing, because mammals absolutely need it. We know that from lots of research to grow well. As I mentioned earlier, the vagus nerve, also the oxytocin system. Requires, a lot of cuddling to develop that properly in early life. But here we have the birds, right? Parrots. They too are touch needy, and they maintain that throughout life too, right? You want to say more about how that they're cleaning feathers and such, and how important those things are?
Yeah, and it's it's interspecific. Panama and I groom each other, and it's I mean, there's a practical element to it to clean things, but it's just the ritual. And it's a way of connecting. And also there's so many ways of touch. There's verbal touch. That's what the parrots do in the jungles, is they call out in the morning, everyone out there, how you doing? And there's a real sense of connection. And I want to say about that too, is where I live here, it's not just within a species, the deer and the ravens and the ground squirrels and the Douglas squirrels and the gray squirrels and the even the bears, the wild turkeys, you name it. Everyone is tuned in. It's all one soup of love. I mean, not that everyone's all touchy-feely with each other, but they are paying attention and they are connected. And there is a very deep sense of commitment to each other. And so they pay attention to each other. And, if the squirrel makes a certain sound, I've noticed that they kind of triangulate. The deer are alert and they're aware of it. It's not like, oh, I hear this thing. It's they feel part of each other in that way. So the touch is, full body, and it's vocal and it's smelling. And, I think that's the other thing, Darcia. It's just this to me is the immersion, is it's just a full sensory connection and communication in that way.
Yeah, and breastfeeding allows especially that full sensory component. If you can't breastfeed, then certainly have the child on your skin-to-skin contact while you're giving them a bottle, for example, to have a close approximation of this synesthesia that can occur because it's growing so many systems at once. You want full sensory development, right, to reach your potential. And I argue that we need all our fullest potential, all of us, and the children are going to save us because they're still open if we raise them well from all the crises we've developed and fostered. We need our full potential for that. So that's why the nest is so important today. And touch.
That breastfeeding, and just to emphasize what Darcia said, with sperm whales, I mean, we're talking about giant whales, 80, 100 feet in this ocean. How do they do breastfeeding? Well, you have to read the book to find out, but they do. But again, it's very much of a collective experience. There's other mothers and other siblings around. And then even in the sense of the wolves, and I don't know if we have time to talk about that, but this is again vicious, nasty. They kill each other, they fight, predators. Well, when you really look through, when you pull off this veneer of this dominant society that we've been conditioned by, you see that they're very much like elephants. Yeah. You see even young males. So there's a father and a mother kind of who are having the babies, but you see even young male wolves stepping in to nurture, to care for, and even other wolves will lactate to support. So we see that there's this, sort of this interwoven connection, which really goes beyond form in the sense of to a deeper sense of connection, community, and belonging.
Yeah, it's amazing how much we've forgotten. And if we talk about touching, play is also a way that you touch. So a lot of animals play together, and you're receiving that touch of reassurance that you're here and you're welcome and you're part of our community and you're part of this whole way of being in the natural world on the earth. We have a lot of information about the importance of touch for various systems and DNA development and so on in chapter 7. I know we have, I think, another 15 minutes or so, Gay. And I know you're eager to talk about the octopuses. Huh? Yeah, there's only a very short epigraph. So, are you ready to talk about them?
I don't even have to. I don't even have to read it.
Yeah, I'll read the epigraph. Reaching out, a delicate tipped tentacle to the human swimming near her, she thought, I feel, therefore I am.
Yeah. Yeah, there was a document that came out in 2012 called the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness. And it was a group of eminent neuroscientists. Darcia probably knows most of them, as well as physicist Stephen Hawking. And they stood on the steps of Cambridge University in the UK and issued this somewhat of a manifesto called the Cambridge Declaration of Consciousness. And what it says is, it's very dense neuroscience speak. But the salient component is that all mammals and all vertebrates, and including invertebrates, such as the octopus, have what they call the neural substrates that we do. In other words, the brain, all this stuff, the underlying things that Darcia's been talking about, that govern and are, give rise to, thinking and feeling and loving and dreaming and consciousness in a fundamental way. And so the octopus, we included that because really trying to show that this is not unique to mammals or, the particular species that we may feel affinity for, other apes, elephants, things like that. And to really nudge people to look beyond form. To see these bodies, the incredible, beautiful bodies with whom we live, as just the portal, if you want to call it, the interface of really touching into the divine. And the octopus, again, doesn't look soft and cuddly like an elephant, although they're fascinating. And they have an extraordinarily different neural structures. They have a lot of their neural ways of interacting with the world, which we call our central nervous system, is also distributed through their arms and their bodies. Now they have a very different kind of evolved nest. The mothers in general, there's many, many, many different species, and there's a lot that's not known about individual species. But in general, a mother octopus gives birth to usually hundreds of little octopuses, and she nurses. She cares for them. She stays with them. She doesn't eat. She uses her arms to keep fresh oxygen over the eggs, and there are some species that do this for 4 years. And because she doesn't eat anything, she dies. She succumbs after they are born. So again, just like the brown bear, there's a mother, and the brown bears, they form a relationship and consummate, and the mother bear basically raises the babies. She goes to hibernation, has the babies in the hibernation den, and basically is the sole parent. But same with the octopus. But what's really important to understand is that they really don't do it alone. I mean, they do, and from the perspective of like the elephants, which is this sort of, and sperm whales, which is this constellation of very active and present allo mothers and allo fathers and allo siblings. But they're so connected with nature, with what we call the rest of nature. So they're really, supported by this one nest, which is Earth, which is nature in that way.
Speaking of aloes, I think we should touch on penguins, the emperor penguin. So I'll read the epigraph and let you talk about them. This is chapter 5, sharing care. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. This was his world, his entire being. Then suddenly there was an abrupt change. Instead of being the sound, he became witness to the sound of his mother's heartbeat. He felt a strange sensation, a feeling of falling away from the whoosh, whoosh. There were whispers of voices, movement, and a more distant, different whoosh, whoosh began, fainter, with a slightly faster pace. This was his father. The egg had left his mother to live in the enfoldment of his father's feathered warmth. The egg was home, a different home, but home.
Yeah, that describes the emperor penguin. And maybe many of you are familiar because that species has been popularized. They're about 4 feet high. They live in the Antarctic. And it's a beautiful example. It kind of segues from the allocare of the elephants. And really, it's that notion, this is a bird again, like the, avian species, that the mother, lays the egg, transfers that to the father immediately because they're under very harsh and very, very cold conditions in the Antarctic. And similar to the octopus, she's very depleted. And so she lays the egg and transfers to the father, which is a huge thing. I mean, this is another thing about this incredible sense of trust and responsibility, and maybe a little precursor, Darcia, to moral commitment, which we go into more detail in the Gray Wolf chapter. Darcia talks about that. And so then he takes care of the egg, and she and all the other mothers trek almost, could be up to 100 miles, 150 kilometers to the ocean, where they spend a couple months in kind of a spa way of replenishing all of their resources, internal resources and mental resources that have gone into the creation of this egg. And while that's happening, the fathers are, this is another beautiful thing, is they all gather together in what they call a huddle. So you have all these, fathers with their egg in the pouch, and they form this huddle. And it's a wonderful man, Dr. André Ancel in France, has been researching emperor penguins for decades, and he writes very beautifully about them. And there's a whole dynamic, where they're all huddled, but then there's shifting, so that the fathers in the internal part of the group, the colony, the temperatures go up, and so then they start to shuffle and they move back. So there's this rotation, and it's all very subtle, this incredible subtle and nuanced choreography of caring for all of these precious treasures. But they do that in community. And then the baby is born, and by that time, the mothers return and they form a family. And there's another thing too, it's very complicated. But there's a lot of them, thousands. Okay. And it's like, well, how do you find everyone? Everyone has a particular idiosyncratic dialect. And they even are quiet. If the neighbor's calling out to find the family, they'll wait until they actually hear. So you see, once again, this very community defined care of not just the babies, but each other. So there's a creche, kind of an intermediate creche period where the youngsters get together. And so it's really, although there's a tendency to focus on the young, the young are part of this whole dynamic, which is why the subtitle, second part of the book title, is creating connected communities, because that's really it. There is no a way of nurturing new life unless you have this synoptic and connected community committed to the young and to each other in profound ways.
Let me just point out, in our ancestral context, nomadic foraging communities, there's a high communalism also. So that's our heritage. And people think, oh no, socialism, communism, I'm going to lose my freedom. But they're in the nomadic foraging community, they're very communal, but they're also very autonomous. They do what they want. There's no one coerces anybody. There's no loss of freedom. It's just that your sense of who you want to be is intertwined with your desire to be part of the community. So it's not a battle like me against, other people, or there's no battling. It's an intertwining, a sense of agency of your own, following your own inner spirit, because the nest fosters the individual's unique spirit with all that support. But they don't suppress things. They don't smother you. They don't coerce you. into a particular way. You just learn from observation as a youngster, and pitch in to whatever the family is doing or the community is doing. And then you learn to be a good community member over time, as you develop and mature. So it's a different understanding of our nature. It's not either or. It's not I need to do what I want, and that's freedom. No, and stay away from me, everybody. So in the United States, we have the battle going on, right? Oh, don't make me do whatever for the community, because then I lose my freedom. Well, if you had grown in a community of responsive care, which is what we're talking about here, you wouldn't have this sense that you have to go your own way or else you're smothered, right? So when you undercare for a child, that means not nest them, where you leave them alone to cry, you leave them alone to sleep, you leave them alone to sit or in a playpen or alone all day long, and they have to learn to smother their own relational spirit, and figure out what to do on their own if they're going to survive. And so they develop what I call a one-person psychology. They just are in their ego. They have to build a big fat ego to feel okay, or else they're going to just be too distressed and die or get very sick or go crazy. So they have to have this kind of fat ego, and be self-centered just to get through life, because they've lost that connection again, right? They've been disconnected, and because of the lack of responsiveness. And we talk a lot about the attachment theory, which is a big, well-known issue for early life. Attachment theory emphasizes the need for the caregiver to respond to the needs of the child in a way that keeps them in the relational bond. And that's got the neurobiological implications that's beyond the psychological ones. Now, so that's what these emperor penguins are doing, right? They're being responsive to the needs of the child as they emerge and as they transfer the egg, and then the child becomes hatched, and all this is responsiveness. So there's no aloneness, there's no forced coercion, forced distress that we think is kind of normal. You have to, make children independent. No, you don't. Right? That's an insane thing from an indigenous perspective, to punish children into being responsible citizens, right? The opposite. You get all sorts of hypocrisy then, because they've lost their connection to their inner spirit, their uniqueness that's going to guide them through life and bring about a virtuous person. That's what indigenous wisdom's about. Instead, we kind of break all that down. Then we tell them, just pay attention to what I'm telling you, the rules, that left brain consciousness again. But their inner self is all dysregulated from all the disruption. And so they're not going to act very well when you're watching them. But on their own, they can get all sorts of self-centeredness, because they haven't developed all those intricate interrelational bonds and threads and know-how for getting along in a communal kind of way. I could go on and on. Sorry. So, Gay, do you have any?
Well, just you brought up about attachment and learning these things. Reminds me of a story about the Dalai Lama. He was visiting many years ago. I don't know if it was Turtle Island, North America. Anyways, someone was asking him about a lot of people have issues of self-esteem and self-worth. And he was turning to his interpreter for quite a few minutes. And the interpreter says that the Dalai Lama doesn't know what that means. In other words, to me, that's almost like learning about attachment, is that all the animals and trees and non-human nature and our indigenous ancestors are born connected. They're born attached. And so when we're talking about the evolved nest, we're really talking about kind of re-knitting back, remembering and revitalizing things that I think are that are instinctual. And I think it also leads us into this, the whole thing about myths, like, oh, animals are just instinctual, putting that down. Well, it's kind of like, wow, how do they, they know all this, they do all this naturally. They don't have to be told. They naturally have this spring of love and care for each other and for their children. They know how to touch their children. They know how to nurse. And so that's the other thing, which really, I think, comes out very strongly. It's been in my writing, but really in our book is, oh my gosh, how not only we have suffered, but how non-humans suffer from these myths that are imposed. Wolves are vicious, and being fearful of wolves and being fearful of bears and being fearful of cougars. I mean, that the number of times, like in that movie I mentioned about Charlie Russell, I think at the beginning they say that over, I don't know, roughly like 100 years, 10 humans have been killed by grizzlies. And over that same period of time, 200,000 bears have been killed. Grizzly bears have been killed. So there's incredible conditioning of fear. And the non-human world, in my experience, and how we, have talked about in the book, is not fear-driven. The substrate is not fear. I would say the substrate of nature and non-humans is love.
Yeah, let me just add on to that, Gay, that when we don't provide the evolved nest, especially in babyhood, we are promoting a biology of fear. And it's because you leave them alone or in distress. What do they know? They know fear. They're panicking. They're in the despair. They're in the abyss. They don't know that you're going to come back later. They don't have that capacity yet. They just know now that this is the end. And so that gets seated in their heart, and they close down their heart, right? Close down their spirit because it's not safe. It's too scary. And then they have to latch on to some ideology, some way of feeling safe, some story that externalizes their fear onto someone else, onto something else, onto the carnivores, onto those people who look different, immigrants, those, people who are not me. And that's what we've done, especially in the United States, where we have very little support for the evolved nest. It's still going in the wrong direction. And so you can see, and we export our ways to the world. So it's really important to get back to understanding who we are as a species. We need a lot of nurturing, just like every other animal provides their young without question. And here we have resistance. Bowlby said, why do people say, oh, the baby needs too much? Why? How can we, how can parents do what they want to do if they have to attend to a baby? And he warns that if you don't provide for that bonding, that biology of love, which is the term of Umberto Maturana, if you don't provide for that, you're going to seed hate and cause a lot of problems for us later, for the society. And that's what we've done.
Does this seem like a good place to close out your session and see if there's some questions here? That was so beautiful. I love this notion that you had that the heart of the book and the heart of the gift economy is the calling forth of community of belonging. And truly, I think that once there is, I guess, secured attachment, when you have the sense of belonging, then there is not the question of survival or not enoughness. You're always in a place of abundant connection and opportunity. So it's so beautiful the way in which you wove together both the extended animal kingdom and brought us back in relationship to what it means to be human on Earth in relationship to the rest of the beings. That is just so beautiful. I'm looking forward to actually finishing the book. Jen, you've come back on. I'm wondering if you had some questions or thoughts yourself that you might want to.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really a wonderful vision of how humans could be and how we've messed up what we are, how we've messed up society. And my theory about that is that exchange and the market and capitalism that we have contradicts that by just quid pro quo, by saying, I'm going to only give to you if you give me back something. And that makes a different kind of human relation from the relation of nurturing directly. And I wondered what you all think about that.
Yeah, that's the ego again. The ego consciousness can't deal with dynamism and fluidity. It just one thing at a time, right? And so you have to you separate. It's all about separation, right? That's the ego consciousness, the left brain that just can't do otherwise. So it's a lack of an integrated brain. We want both sides of our brain to work together, and that left brain to be, honoring the right hemisphere's wisdom. But we don't do that. We've enhanced that ego consciousness and enslaved and shut down the right hemisphere. And so we end up with these fake kind of ways of being. The whole capitalism thing is all fake, right?
Yeah, agree. Yeah, thank you.
I think it's also a shift into the willingness to be vulnerable. And again, this is a myth about the animals. It's survival of the fittest, and everyone for themselves. And they're definitely, animals love. I've never encountered a form that does not love life, and the animals that I've met just they squeeze every. This is her name is Monsi. She's a rabbit, has had several strokes, and she's almost 12 years old. And they just, no matter what condition, really, they just squeeze every molecule of life because they love life. It's not a matter of survival. In my mind, it's a love and a respect of life. And I think that's the value, that in a sense, there's not such a self-preoccupation, like I've got to survive. I've got to make, I've got to do this against you and get this from you so I can survive. And that's a mentality that I don't encounter, that I have never encountered. I don't think one does when you peel off those conditioning glasses. So again, like I think it's learning how to be open to vulnerability, which is very much associated with practices of mindfulness and meditation. I mean, it doesn't mean just be sort of flaccid about this, but really tapping into the deeper divine of the substrate of life and living in that way.
Thank you. Well, let's see. Jen, yes.
Well, I was just curious because there's the idea that Darwin got the idea of the survival of the fittest from competitive capitalism of his day. Do you all have any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I understand that's the case also, rather than what was it? What's his name? Kropotkin, the Russian who went around and saw, no, there's a lot of cooperation and a lot of sharing and a lot of gift economy in the natural world. There's not this competitive survival of the fittest. So yeah, I don't know. I'm not an economics person, so I agree with you though that I've read that Darwin was just fitting into his culture.
So how that idea of evolution would be different without that model.
Yes, and so I subscribe to evolutionary systems theory, which is much broader than this focus on genetics and natural selection, which, I mean, Darwin talked about natural selection. Whoever's fit for the particular environment is going to survive into the next generations. And they identified later it was genes, or at least I think it was genes. But there's a lot more we inherit. than genes. And genes, like, they're just a blueprint, and they cannot act on their own. You have to have experience to turn on the genes or turn them off. And early care turns on genes, for example, to control anxiety. In the studies that have been done with rats and then identified similar features in humans, if you don't have a mother who's very nurturing those first 10 days as a rat pup, which would be the 18 months for a young child, then the nurturing mother in a rat is one who licks you a lot, which is the equivalent of being carried and touched a lot in humans. If you don't have that mother, you never turn on the genes for anxiety. And the only way to control anxiety is to use drugs, to be given drugs, right? So we created all sorts of drug addicts as a result of the lack of touch, for example. We inherit then not only genes, but epigenetic plasticity based on our experience. Our personality, our neurobiology is shaped by experience. We also inherit the evolved nest. That's a part of our inheritances, plus culture and ecology and self-organization around experience. That's what babies are doing. They're building themselves around their experiences they have. So there's a lot of things we inherit. And it's just that it's easy to measure genes because governments have been funding this. I talked to someone about this who's a specialist in epigenetics and said, why are we focusing on genes all the time when the thing is the real source of difference and change and development is epigenetics? He said, yeah, they've just got all these machines and they're funding them. The government research institutes are still funding those things. And so that's where the talk is. And it's much easier to focus there than on epigenetics.
And this brings up a really important point. I don't think that we can progress to this new paradigm until we stop the violence against our non-human kin. The majority of neuroscience and biomedical research has been based, Darcia mentioned, like with pups, of course, the Harlow experiments, in other words, doing violence, causing trauma, causing breakdown. And that continues. And they're doing it now with octopuses, because octopuses have been found to have a fantastic thing called RNA editing, and they have intelligence like we do, and yet they're being bred by the millions to be, and this is a term that was used, to be the new laboratory rat. So that, to me, is absolutely critical, that we have to stop that and stop promoting that and turning a blind eye to that, because doing violence to them is doing violence to ourselves, and understanding that, and this is the message of the evolved nest, that to really embrace an extended definition of kin. So it's absolutely critical to understand that, put into practice what even science has shown. And I think that through that, we will begin to really feel like we belong, and really feel and be able to transform this oppressive conditioning that has been so pernicious.
And we can blame techno-science, which comes out of Descartes' separation of body and mind, Francis Bacon saying that science should be about power, separating ethics from science and ethics from economics also, but that it's okay. Descartes would torture animals with vivisection, and they're just machines. That's just what the machine does, is cry out, whatever. And oh my God, it's horrible. And then Harry Harlow, for those who don't know this, he was doing experiments on rhesus monkeys, and he was raising them individually. He would separate the young from their mothers and raise them in a separate cage. And then he found, John Bowlby over time came to visit him. He's the father of attachment theory, and said, that's not ethologically correct. They need to be with their mothers and, the community. And so Harlow started to do experiments on separating the mother, the baby from the mother, and then giving them a cuddly fake wire a wire mother or one with a towel on it, and where they could be, anyway, doing all these experiments and then finding, yeah, without mom, without touch, because they could hear other monkeys. They could probably smell them, but they weren't touched. Without touch, they would become autistic and aggressive. And even if they were raised with peers, they had trouble as adults. And then he wrote about maternal love being important, which was supposedly a revelation to the scientific community and rather controversial. And I'm sure, Kay, you have more to say about this because you're more expert about it. But yeah, it's just
and I will say, and I think this is important to be aware of, is that this cognitive dissonance that is part of the Western science culture, and I would say the larger culture, the dominating culture, is cognitive dissonance. So Harry Harlow was fully aware. He had a term called the pit of despair, where he would put a newborn baby monkey in this enclosure, pit of despair. He had things called the rape rack, where there was artificial insemination. So, this is how deep rooted they are and how it's continuing now. This is in our education system, where the children, that Darcia described, and it continues on and on and on, in this conveyor belt, when, holding up, people get PhDs with holding up a rat or a mouse by the tail over water to see their fear reaction. I'm not exaggerating. And I think we just have to sort of, it's rather shocking. And I think it's really difficult to see how, I never did that, but in the sense of just this partitioning of blocking off our feelings and being constantly, as Darcia described, up in here. So I think very much integral to this whole process is our practices of mindfulness and meditation and contemplation, and to come back into our bodies of the earth in that way. But these continue, and the other thing is they're labeled in for the greater good. These are done for the greater good, and that really means humans, and that means humans of a particular kind, in that way. So we see this expansive unity of life has eclipsed and has telescoped down to a very, very, very narrow, with the loss of the gift economy, with the loss of the evolved nest, and to this very small, microscopic population of individuals that are continuing this profound dysfunction. And it's a ricochet. This, this is what we're learning, is we're seeing what we can't do that, because it's it's self-harming when we do that to someone or to whatever they look like. we're really doing that. Nisargadatta, who's a Maharaj, who was a Indian a teacher, he has a book called I Am That, and the whole point of it is I am you, you are me, whomever you're looking at.
Yeah, and let me just say that techno science that I mentioned, just like there's another version of science, other versions, just like there's other versions of the evolution, right? Evolution systems theory is broader and doesn't focus just on genes. There's also other forms of science. Native science, indigenous science is much more holistic and observation-based and intergenerationally based, and not about torturing our kin. And within our Western science, there's also Evelyn Fox Keller, who worked with corn, and she felt with the organism. She talked about the corn as a partner in the exploration of knowledge. So there are other forms that we can turn to. We don't have to be stuck in this industrial, capitalistic techno science.
Thanks. Let's just check in with Liliana. I think there were a couple of questions that actually came forward. So let's see what our audience has as questions for Gay and Darcia.
Well,
so I'm
here. I'm going to ask a question that is related to what we were talking about touch that Jen posed. And is, can you say something about the effects of COVID on us by making us distance and not touch or access to other human bodies? I can read it again.
No, I got it. So I think it has had some harmful effects on the very young children, because their brains and bodies are being shaped by experience. And so if they're not touched, that would be an issue. But if parents are home with baby and they were touching them and they're not at work, that was a good thing, right? So probably a lot of variability for the young children. In terms of older folks, we all need touch. Even our nomadic foraging cousins, they'll, in this great savanna, they'll sit shoulder to shoulder, or they'll hold hands walking through the jungle. So touch is just an ongoing experience for everybody. And so if we're missing that, it is an issue. But there are other ways to feel the touch and get touched, and that's your pets or animals, then lying on the earth, earthing, and hugging a tree. So there, not COVID issues there. So there are alternatives, but still, people who didn't have the alternatives are probably have been affected and feel more lonely as a result.
Okay, Liliana, let's go for another.
Yeah, I have a question from Jill Goldman. And she says, I have a question in reference to the continuum concept, which was how we raise our children, now grown. I nursed each for 3.5 years. They were attached to me literally with sling for many, many years. We co-slept until they decided to move into their own beds. I had amazing community. Our kids came everywhere with us. They're amazing adults now, very centered, etc. However, looking back, reflecting, I am feeling some kind of guilt and how this is virtually impossible now for young parents. I had the opportunity to decide not to work outside the home while I raise my children. I am wondering if this adds guilt to young mothers who have to work and can't be with children full time, as they need to work outside of the home, not really by choice.
Yes, this is an issue of mom shaming or mom blaming. And we have to realize that, again, it's not just mom that is responsible for the children, the community is. And we have just pulled the rug out. We've degraded all sorts of supports for families in the United States in particular. And then we think it's that we blame the parents, right, for when things don't go right, especially moms. So we're in a very hostile environment for families. We're imprisoned, enslaved by the belief that money's more important and working is more important, and low wage jobs that make people have to have multiple. I mean, this is an insane place. We're like in a death camp. I can't believe it. We can't go on like this. So we don't want to shame mothers, but we want to show what we should be doing, what optimizes development, what children need to grow healthy, instead of then later having, they need a drug for this or that, or intervention for this or that, or they go to prison, all because we didn't know what they needed or couldn't provide it or didn't provide it. The culture has to wake up, and we have to demand that children come first, that families are the center of the community, are the center of our life together. Not money making, not capital. This is insanity. That's that left brain again, thinks it knows it all. But we know better. The maternal gift economy knows better. Mothers know better. And we need to demand and change the system. So a lot of structures have to be revamped. We're giving the kind of framework for where to go. And all those who can, just cut back on working, on being away, and who can build their own community, since we have a lot of people who don't seem to have that. You almost have to build it yourself as a parent. We're giving the kind of the signal for this is the way to go. to optimize our future as a humanity and our species. Otherwise, we're going to perish as a species, I think.
I'll just, in one of our chapters, the one about brown bears brings in kind of a different or another dimension. And it's called Should I Have Children? And I think that listening to the brown bear story is very important, that when there is an active choice of having a child, it can't be ego-centered. And it has to be really done in the sense of thoughtfulness, of providing not only for that child, but what the implications are for the larger society. And so that's what also we encourage, is that it's not just a given to have children. It's a gift that involves the whole planet. And so in the case of the brown bear, it's used as an example where they become impregnated. This is not unique to them, but they're an example. But the egg doesn't implant. And sometimes the bear does not become pregnant and does not have babies. And so we talk about that, from the perspective of, what are the factors? Can she care? Does she have the internal resources? Does she have external resources? Is the situation and the where she's bringing the baby in, or the babies into the world, are they available? Will they be available for the child and for her? So that to me is a very important thing. And I will bring up in the sense of, we also have to have an expanded definition of kin. So that because of the society that is dominating now, capitalistic, extractive, the non-humans, animals, and trees are not able to have their families. They're not able to survive and have their healthy communities because of the demands put on by humans. So we're also at that point, I think is reevaluating, not seeing that having children is a right, but rather is something of an expression of life that has to be congruent with the rest of life.
Thank you. I have a question. These are such wonderful tools for healthy child rearing, but as adults, most of the people, in fact, I think everyone here is an adult that's on our Zoom. But for those of us who didn't have all of these elements, who might not have had them completely, are there ways in which we can cultivate these? Because I know in child development, this develops certain systems kicking on. So can you speak a little bit about that and recommendation?
Yeah, in my neurobiology book from a few years ago, this which I put a link to it in the chat. It's the longest chapter. I spent another year on the longest chapter on what to do if you didn't get the nest experience in early life. So there's a lot of things you can do. It depends on where, and how your systems got off kilter. If you're someone who gets upset easily, goes into, reactivity, then you'll need to learn how to calm that down. And there are different ways to do that. Vagus nerve stimulation, belly breathing and singing help with the vagus nerve. Play, as I said, builds that right hemisphere. Various things like that. If your issue is that you're too socially anxious, then that's partially the calming aspect, but also it's the know-how for getting along with others. Maybe you didn't have enough social experience. Then you'll need to do things that are kind of social and safer. And what I did with my undergraduate students, many of whom have mental health disorders, college students at Notre Dame, we would play folk song games, because I used to be a music teacher too. Where you're, like a hunting we will go, we'll catch a little fox and put him in a box, and then we'll let him go. And you're building a bigger and bigger circle. You're touching each other. You're singing. You're looking in the eye. You're laughing. All that's building the right hemisphere, the vagus nerve, and it's not so scary because it's structured. It's structured play, and then that'll help you then start to loosen up and be able to play go sledding, in the winter down a hill, and the silly experiences, so that you start to belly laugh more. All those things are going to help you grow. And then also to expand your imagination. If you were raised in a very fundamentalist home, and you're were taught that only these people are good and everyone else is bad, you'll have to work at reading about and meeting and making friends with people who are from those other groups that you were told never to get close to. And you realize, oh, they're fine. They're like me, right? And you're building that sense of oneness, of community with the whole, with the cosmos, with all life, with all kin.
I would say that all of the elements of the evolved nest apply. I mean, aside from breastfeeding, but even breastfeeding is, you can think of as just nurturance, breaking bread with someone is a beautiful ritual, to really enjoy that co-nurturance in that way. And I, of course, would say that there's so much to see the non-humans as our kin, and as learn to be friends with them and listen to them is very sense of belonging, enhances a sense of belonging, and is also supportive. There's others that, like me, that we all experience. And again, I'll stress that the contemplative studies, where we move from the horizontal and go into the vertical, where we're rooting into earth, and that orientation is very stabilizing and really helps so much in terms of being able to interact in a healthful and positive way with other humans who are we are understandably on edge. We're understandably have these unhealthy symptoms, because that's the environment in which we're if not raised, but we're immersed.
Yeah, and let me just add that the nestedness is for all of us, apart from those birthing and breastfeeding generally. But we have a Evolved Nest curriculum that is about to be launched, and it's going to be for everybody to use as they will. But in there, so it's going to say, why is this important? Do a pretest. Why is this important? What facts do you need to know? Here's some podcasts to watch, some videos, podcasts to listen to, videos to watch, essays to read. And then how do you apply this component to your life and your professional life? What can you do now to be nested in this way, and there's suggestions made. So it is something we can all do ourselves now, and include the natural world in that. I'm working on a paper and book, probably, that emphasizes not only this developmental nestedness that we've been talking about, but the vertical that Gay mentioned, that sense of being connected to the earth community and to earth's ways and cycles, but also to the cosmos, connected to the stars, and that, unmanifest spiritual realm that we don't really understand, but we know is there, right? That implicate order, David Bohm's word. And then also our horizontal nestedness, our connection to our ancestors and the wisdom that we've inherited, respect for those, and then also to be honoring future generations. So that's the vertical, the horizontal, and the developmental.
Beautiful. Well, that's going to be a wonderful gift to the world once you get that fully developed. Let's just check back in with Liliana and see if there's another question.
Yes, there is. From Benjamin Peters for both panelists. What are your thoughts on the rights of nature? On the rights of nature movement, the movement to extend rights to other species and even to ecosystems through human-based law systems. What are its promises and its limitations in your view?
Well, probably Gay will be able to speak more wisely about this, but I'm all for it. I know that a river in New Zealand has been designated as a person, and then people have to pay attention. It's like awakening reawakening the imagination, the understanding of kinship that goes beyond just people. So I'm very much in favor. In terms of the limitations, I don't know. And maybe Gay has something to say about it.
I agree with Darcia. I'm very much, I think I'm very much promote that and believe in it. I think it's essential, and it's just a kind of a different way of looking at expanding our definition of kin. I think that there are intrinsic limitations in the sense of that. I mean, it's extremely important and vital. But I think the most important part is for humans to withdraw in the sense of even the notion of rights. I mean, the notion of rights, to me, kind of starts to introduce this notion of me and you. And I have something, and, you know, this person has something and they have something, which does not in any way. I think this is absolutely critical because that's the system in which we're immersed. And so we're trying to manipulate that system to internally transform. But at least in my experience, and those like Charlie and others that I have, perhaps Evelyn Fox, the experience with there isn't a notion of rights, there isn't a notion of property. There's just a notion of respect for life. And so that, to me, the most important part again is we need to withdraw our presumption of rights as a species, or even as a subgroup or whatever, the presumption of rights, and to really start to understand the fundamental, what it means fundamentally to live in such a way that does not impose on another. I think that's kind of always, what can I do to transform? What can we do, other humans do, that will not prevent or impinge upon non-humans for achieving their lives and their desire for peace and wellness and security. Thank you for the question.
Part of what develops with deep nestedness, what I was talking about, the vertical cosmic connection, nature connection, developmental nestedness, and horizontal nestedness. Part of what develops there is this relational consciousness, the awareness that you're in a web of life, like a spider on a web, and everything you do is affecting everything else. And you have this consciousness all the time. And we see this in our cousins who live in deep nestedness. And you also develop relational know-how, how to get along with this creature, this tree, that plant, these people, this river, and you know how to do it and move through the world in a way that respects life, as Gay was saying. So those are pieces that we're missing in the industrialized, colonized cultures that we live in, that I think I was just going to write a note to Marta that the global South knows a lot of this stuff. The global South has been keeping some of this alive. Indigenous First Nation peoples around the world have been keeping some of this know-how, this consciousness, these skills, the nestedness alive until this crazy sibling in the North wakes up and realizes they need help. So we need the global South to lead us, and the indigenous folks to lead us here. And we have to be humble. That left brain doesn't like to be humble. So we have to bring down the ego, tease it away, like our cousins do in the nomadic foraging communities, and get back into being wholly here with others as equal partners.
Thanks, Darcia. Jen, I wondered if you wanted to respond to that question also, if you had thoughts.
Well, I've just been thinking so much about the environmental disasters that are happening, and wondering, you know, what can we do with the whole animal and human community? Sorry, to survive all of us in some way. You know, That's my question right now.
Well, when I give talks, I say we all can work wherever we are, whatever our gifts are, to reconnect, to help people feel like they belong, that they're an Earth community member, the way we speak about our kin, our animal and plant kin, the way we act towards them, how we model our behavior towards our kin, and that means non-humans and humans, and speak and write and go to meetings when it's appropriate, depending on where you are at work. Now, some people work in places where it's really destructive, so that's something that's more challenging. But all of us in our everyday lives can be much more conscious of our relational connections and be more committed to making sure we're enhancing the well-being and nurturing the others around us, whether they're human or non-human.
Thanks, Darcia.
I would, I encourage everyone to orient their lives in service to the non-human world. And it doesn't mean like, forgetting oneself or the humans, but it's been tilted in the other way. And I think that an attitude and a way of living in service to non-human animals is very healing, and I think it is transformative, and it brings us into alignment with what's happening. The animals live in presence, so they're certainly, by living in presence, they're totally connected, and being in service, caring about whether they have food or not. I mean, it's against the law. People go to jail. In one of my other books, Carnivore Minds, I talk about a woman who was jailed in Florida because she gave food to bears, and then they jailed her again when she got out. She was in her 70s, I believe, because she was giving food to crows, and then they basically got her put away into a retirement place where she died. I mean, that is so violent, and the animals are starving. They don't have food, they don't have water. And there's, where I live, people have gates up, and they really can't survive. So to me, to appreciate that and to be in service and support them, and by supporting them, we're really supporting the restoration of the earth, and as Darcia calls it, the cosmos and the alignment. And that right there, I think, in very, very, very deep ways, that shift in consciousness is just so profound. And that consciousness, I believe, is so deep that it will have a very, very healing and restorative effect.
And let me just add to expanding the notion of kin. Water is kin. The soil is kin. And so we need to honor water by not overusing it, by not wasting it, by thanking it. The soil by not poisoning it with pesticides, fertilizer, herbicides. We should be planting native plants whenever possible, and honoring then the ecology wherever we are, the local landscape. Every landscape is a little different and needs certain things to be functioning in a healthy way. And indigenous peoples around the world know this traditionally. We need to realign ourselves with the landscape where we are, each of us, and honor the animals and plants that are native there, and honor the invaders as we can, but to be more conscientious about our use of resources. They're not resources, they're kin. Let's remember that, and honor and thank them, and be grateful for their gifts, and be cautious and careful with how much we demand.
Genevieve, isn't that the essence of gifting? Where the natural impetus. I mean, I have to say that makes me feel really, when to give something and you see the pleasure and the life in another, it's, for me, it's also self-transformative. It makes me feel really good to be able to give and be in that, to have that. So I guess that's just coming full circle, is that's really the essence of the gifting.
Thank you.
Thank you both, Darcia and Gay, for joining us today. It was a fabulous conversation. We've almost hit the top of the hour. So let me just check. And Darcia, do you have any closing, just a sentence or something that you'd like to say before we actually, I'll come back on and close us out, and then I'll go to Gay and then to Jen.
Well, just to encourage everyone to build your nest around you and to nest others around you, and to foster that sense of connection and oneness to the cosmos and to our natural earth way community.
Thank you. Gay?
Oh gosh. I guess I would say is, the animals and the plants are just pure love, and be open to seeing that and receiving that and reflecting that back, because it's the most wonderful experience to be in that space. And that, like I said, I think is probably the most potent, the gifting and delight is the most healing and the most transformative experience and gesture that we can all make to restore us all.
Thank you so much. How about you, Jen?
Yeah, I've been writing a paper about about the basis of mothering as the basis of language and of our relationship with the world, and I was thinking about it, and the ending of the paper, I was thinking, and what is this? What is this? And it came to me the phrase that's from Dante's, the final phrase in the Divine Comedy.
Genevieve just froze for me.
She's fine. She's fine.
She's fine. She didn't freeze for me.
Okay, so the final phrase of Dante's Divine Comedy is l'amore che muove il sole e le altre stelle. And so the what it is in the basis of the maternal gift economy is love that moves the sun and all the stars.
Beautiful.
So that's my.
I think we may have lost Letitia. Are you here, Letitia? Oh, she's not. All right. Well, I can tell everyone that we will be back next Saturday for Salon 51 with Genevieve Vaughan. Would you like to say a little bit about that, Jen?
No, just that it's a way of seeing, I think just the title, which is that the maternal gift economy is deeper than ethics. So if you all want to come and hear about that and think about that, we'd love to have you.
And I put a link to register for that in the chat. So thank you, everyone. It's been wonderful. And I really appreciate Darcia and Gay joining us here today. So bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much.